Welcome to the Armed and Ready podcast. I am your host, Jason Wood, the VA loan guy. We have a really exciting episode lined up for you, so come check it out. Welcome to another episode of the Armed and Ready podcast. I'm your host, Jason Wood, the VA loan guy. Today, we're super excited for the guests we have. We have Army veteran, HT, Purple Heart recipient, and also entrepreneur. So we're excited to hear about his story and learn about all the things he's doing in kind of the entrepreneurial space. So HT, thanks, man. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so HT and I are connected through my marketing manager and Tom Tran, who's an awesome guy. So we'll throw a shout out to Tom, who helps to make all this possible for us. But HT, so you're in the Army. So tell us how you ended up just deciding to join the military and kind of what was your military path? What'd you do?
So I actually came from a military family. A lot of my families were refugees from the Vietnam War. Majority of my family fought with the South, which was part of all the Southern Vietnam Navy. An interesting story was that my great uncle, who I call grandfather, was the admiral for the Southern Fleet of Vietnam. Worked really closely with Rear Admiral, why am I forgetting now? He's a close family friend. He had a close family friend who was also an admiral, and so that's my connection with the military. And growing up, my dad always reminded me, since he was part of the Navy, Southern Navy, was that being an American is a privilege, not a right. And so when coming from a large family of about 50 cousins and being Vietnamese American first generation, only my brother and I joined the services. My brother's a Marine, and I ended up joining the Army. What drew me to enlisting in the Army was at a point in my life, I was 26, and I, at that point felt like I was living a very selfish life. I always wanted to join before. I tried joining the Naval Academy. I didn't meet the minimum requirement or the exception to join the Naval Academy coming out of 1997. So a few years later, after finishing college, I just felt like there's a point in my life where that calling always called back to me, like, hey, it's time to serve, but it had to be at the right moment. And I think at the age of 26, I just felt like, I was living a selfish life. I had an apartment, I had my own car, I had a nice job, I was moving up in the corporate world, but it just wasn't enough. And I think the one question after our night of partying, someone asked me, if you were to die today, what do you think people would say about you? In a group of 13 guys, after a night of partying, some had some really good answers. Some had some funny answers. And I think when it came to me, I didn't have an answer. And I think that drove me crazy, right? Like, what was someone going to say about a 26-year-old guy? I'd had all these things. It just didn't feel right. And so literally 2 weeks later, I went down to the recruiting office, and I think I answered that call that was coming from the heart. I said, I got to do something that's unselfish. And it literally led me to an article in Time magazine, beginning of, I think it was in January or February 2006, in Time magazine, where I was reading an article where they said, a lot of soldiers weren't able to go home. And not only that, but these kids that had fathers serving and mothers serving in the Army didn't know who their parents were, and they were out for 12 months, 18 months at a time. When they came back, the kid didn't know who they were, and I think at that time, that just kind of hit home at me. And so I said, what? One day, literally, at the middle of my work shift, I said, what? Let me go take a long lunch. I'll be right back. And ended up going down to the recruiting office and enlisting into the Army. The infantry of all jobs.
It's interesting. Like you mentioned that, like that tug at your heart to do something. It's kind of unexplainable, right? I mean, I think most of us who have served had that feeling, right? That we had to do something more. And the military oftentimes is the answer to that call. But yeah, it's an indescribable feeling, I feel like. And
I will tell you this too. Timing was a really big deal. I think in 97, when I was a senior in high school, I think if I would have gone to the Naval Academy, it would have been more. It would have just been the uniform, right? It would have been like the cool thing to do, or you felt like it was more personal ego. I think the age of 26, 7 years later, making that choice was something more beyond myself.
Yeah.
Something an unselfish act, and I think that was how the way when I looked at it and reflect on it was the definition of service changed a whole lot, right? I think I understood what sacrifice meant at 26. I understood like, hey, you know what? I'm going to join, the infantry. I might not come back. And I had these conversations. I think when I was 17 and I, was trying to get in the Naval Academy, literally my conversations with my family, with my friends were completely different, right?
Yeah.
And that was the degree of separation on that made me go ahead and enlist. Like I fully understood what it meant, right? And that's what made me commit to that.
Yeah, and it's a really big point. I talked to so many people that we both know who enlisted in the military just right out of high school. And a lot of times, there are many that like, hey, I have that tug in my heart for service, right? And
Right.
there's a camp too that are like, I just didn't know what I was gonna do with my life, so that's what I decided to do, and it doesn't make it bad, but it definitely is a different decision when you've already you already got life going, right? You got your
Right.
college behind you, got a career started, so yeah, it's an honorable thing. So how long were you in the army?
So I enlisted in 2006, got severely wounded in 2008, and then got medically retired in 2009. So I was around a little bit over the 3 year mark.
Okay.
But I'll be honest with you, not a day goes by where I feel like, my career could have gone. I was committed to going to being a lifer. I wanted to do 20 years. I love my lifestyle there. I learned a lot more in those 3 years about myself than I ever have the 26 years before that. I got
Yeah.
tested all the time. And I loved it. I honestly did. I actually came home for R&R. My dad's like, "Oh, you're gonna finish your contract and go." And I told my dad, I said, "You know what? I'm looking to go to pre-ranger. Go to airborne school. Like, there are all these things I had on my list that I wanted to do." And I even told my dad, I said, I got recruited to go test for special operations. And my dad he's like, he didn't understand. He's like, "You have a college degree. I escaped a country of war so that you can have a better opportunity. And now both my sons are about to, engage in war." He didn't understand that, but I think, I had to remind him. I said, when we were growing up, you made us really think about our freedom. And I said, I don't think we understood that as kids. You were a traditional Vietnamese man, father raising two American raised son. We obviously didn't listen when you were telling us this, but I think as we got older, we realized like, hey, it's time to pay this back. Like, hey, this freedom has a whole different meaning to it now.
Yeah.
And, that's why we went in. And, it's, you know, timing, like I'm telling you, just timing plays timing plays a huge role in all the decisions that we make, right? And just on your point about being 17 and then enlisting, and then it's good for some, but for others. As a team leader, I asked some of the new privates that had come to my platoon. I said, "Why didn't you go to college? Why didn't you go to education?" I think a majority of my answers that I got were, "I don't think I was smart enough," or "I didn't think I was prepared
Interesting.
to do that. I had no other choice." And I was thinking, you always have another choice. And then for the guys, because I was in infantry, I only dealt with males. So a lot of my other soldiers were like, "Hey, I knew this from a young age." And you can see the difference in effort. You can see the difference in mentality of going through this, right? And the success and the promotions of those separate different mentalities, there was a huge difference, right?
Yeah.
And that all played a part in it.
Yeah.
Timing.
Yeah. The timing is critical. Um, so now you were wounded, right?
I
Wounded in
was.
action. Um, where were you? What happened?
It was Mother's Day of 2008. We were on a we were attached, our infantry platoon company actually was attached to a special operations unit. And so our missions completely changed, right? We went from our normal day patrols, doing everything during the day, and every now and then a few night QRFs and stuff like that. And then when we joined the Special Operation Task Force, we, slept during the day, worked at night. All our missions were night now. We were doing some high profile classified stuff. And then one night when we were supposed to hit this objective, we looked at it, we studied our mission objectives, thought we knew, everything, we had everything down, and then we land on this objective, and nothing that we went over went according to plan. And then everything that we saw on the plans weren't there anymore. And then so happened that, we were getting ready. We saw some lights flickering on a house that wasn't on our intel. And then so we started to make our movement towards that way to secure the area and to make sure we were safe. My captain stepped on a tripwire that was made out of brass copper. We didn't find that out until months later, but the team found a very thin copper wire that was rigged to a mortar, a 122 mortar.
Ooh.
And he stepped on it. I was his right-hand man. I was his RTO, and he lost his leg, and I lost my eye and fractured my femur, and I have a titanium rod in there now, broken fingers and shrapnel to the face,
Man.
But that's part of life. You plan for something and you think it's going to go accordingly, and things happen, and here we are.
Yeah, you adjust. So in your time in, I mean, I know it's joining at 26, obviously perspective and reason and stuff is all different. Are there any experiences or events that really like resonate with you that help kind of carry you through to what you're doing and who you are today? Any great advice from leaders or experiences you had?
I do actually, and I like to give this moment because he's no longer with us. He passed away a few years ago. Obviously, the 22 a day resonates, right? And I talked to him like a week before. But there's just, you go through, before you enlist, you just think you're like, you're this big, tough guy. I can do anything. Like, I know what I'm doing, especially at the age of 26. And you're like, oh, I'm not a quitter. And then you get to the point where you're doing your training, you're running these objectives to get ready for war. And I had this moment of weakness where I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, we're road marching up this big old hill. We've been at it for 5 miles now. And I was the gunner. So, I had all my pack. And I quit. And then my at the time, my team leader, who was an E5, Sergeant DeCiccio, walks up to me. He's like, you can't quit. You got to keep going. And he just got back from deployment. And I was like, I just need to take a break right now. Like, hey, this is a training exercise. This is like, we're never quitting a mission. I was like, but if you're quitting now, you're going to quit later, right? And he got in my face. He was yelling at me. Obviously, that hurt my ego. That hurt my pride, right? And I was kind of like, and, he let me up all the way back to the garrison. And I just kept thinking to myself, I'm like, I can do this. I'm tough. I had a weak moment. And then interesting enough, I wasn't very happy with him. He wasn't one of my favorite people, right? Because obviously because it's your ego, right? And then we make it to Iraq, and I had to, his voice was always in the back of my head. It's one of those things where, I felt like I was being grudgeful because I'm like, oh, you know what? He called me a quitter. I'm not a quitter. You know what I'm saying? Like I just needed that moment. I just needed a moment. And then you land your boots in Iraq, and and things are happening. And then we're attached as a special operations command. We were black patchers, which is not unidentified, unknown soldier, right? Because that you're working with these guys, and you're running through these missions, and you're like, you know what? I don't get a moment to take a break. I don't get a moment to be like, stop. Hey, stop shooting at me. Hey, stop, running these missions because I need a break. And when I got injured, I think his message is what resonated with me the most. Because when I was at the hospital at the old Walter Reed, they were like, well, you know what? You're going to have to learn how to walk again, learn how to use your hands again. you might not be able to run again. And in the infantry, you're used to running at least an average of 5 miles per day or more,
Right.
right? And these people kept telling me I couldn't do this, I couldn't do that. I just remember his voice, and he was like, "You don't understand what it's like when you're over there. Like, there's no quitting. You got to keep moving forward. People are going to tell you can't do this. People are going to tell you, you know what, that you're weak. Your enemies aren't gonna respect you. They're not going to listen to you how the way you feel about things." He goes, "If you keep telling yourself you can't do this or you need a moment for this," he goes, "how far do you think you're going to go?" And so at the hospital, people, these doctors, these nurses are like, "Hey, Sergeant Tran, you're not going to be able to walk the same way. You might not be able to walk for a while. You might not be able to run as much as you used to." And I think that started to get to me, affecting me mentally, right? Like, as in, like, hey, am I going to let these doctors tell me that I can't do this, or they're not, or tell me that I can't live the way I need to live or want to live? And his voice would always come in the back, and I said, no, I'm gonna do this. So I became, you built that resiliency, right?
Right.
And I was like, I will not let another person yell at me or call me a quitter again. And within a matter of 3 months, I started walking again, like normally, right, without crutches, without like a cane or a walker. By the end of the 5th month, I started running a mile, right? And I just remembered him, but I hadn't talked to the sergeant in like forever. And it wasn't until like maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, one of our brothers had passed away, obviously to mental health issues. And he was arranging this. So I called him up, and I wanted to check up on him and say, "Hey, Sergeant DeCiccio, it's been a long time. It was probably like almost 7 or 8 years at this point."
Wow.
And I said, "How are things going?" He's like, "Good, Tran. You know what?" And he was so excited to hear from me, And so we had this long conversation. Towards the end of the conversation, I said, "You know what? I owe you something." He goes, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Do you remember that time that you yelled at me? Do you remember that time that you called me a quitter?" I said, "I was so angry at you. I was so mad at you." I said, "But you know what? It took me years later to understand that lesson." And he's like, "Wait." He goes, "I yelled at everybody." I'm like a true infantry sergeant. I'm like, "Yeah, you did, but you yelled at me for going up the hill." He's like, "You know what? I think I recall that." I said, "But you know what? That lesson you taught me never left my mind and never left my heart." I said, "You hurt my ego, but I'm so glad you did. I am calling you today to check up on you, but I also wanted to say thank you to you." And he was like, "Tran, that means so much to me." He was like, he goes, when you're a team leader, you're getting your guys ready for war. You don't think about the feelings or the emotion of what you say. You're just trying to get them prepared because you've seen the dark side already." I said, "Well, I've seen that dark side." I said, what I didn't like about you, I became you in Iraq, because for my guys, for my team, I was the same exact way. I said, I took the feelings out of it. I said, I just needed to make sure that you got home safely to your parents or to your wife, and kids, because that was more important to me than anything else. I said, when we were doing that training exercise, all I did was I thought about myself. I said, and the crazy part was when I joined the Army, I was doing it for someone besides me. I said, at some point I got caught up into me again, right? And I said, so I thanked him for this conversation. He was like, "Man, that means the world to me." And I'm so glad I got that chance to thank him for that moment, because of him, every doctor, every nurse that said I couldn't do whatever I could do, I ended up leaving the hospital 15 months later, feeling whole. The only thing that, I was missing was my eye, but that's the cost of war, and there's no other way around it, right?
Yeah.
I built this nice support group. I built a mental plan for myself that said, hey, you know what? You knew what the cost of war was going to be prior, and then you found out what it really cost, and the time, the life that the guys spent patching me up to take me back to Balad Air Force Base, and then emergency evac out to Lundstuhl for emergency surgery. I said, those things cost time. Those things cost sweat, blood, and tears. Am I going to waste my second chance at life? And honestly, with that mentality and then not quitting, has brought me to so many more beautiful things, right? One, life.
Yeah.
Two, a good support group. Three, I'm married and wife and kids, because I gave up all that at the age of 26 so I can go serve. I knew before I joined, never gonna have a wife, not gonna have kids until I'm done with what I need to do. But then I've been afforded that. Like, I can't waste that. And I tell everybody too, I feel like now I'm on borrowed time. This is a blessing. You know what I'm saying? It's not something that was is a right, or it was given to me as a gift to understand these certain lessons, these certain things. And the fact that I was able to say thank you to him before he left us, the understanding that the journey that I've been on, everything from that moment on Mother's Day of 2008 has been a blessing. It's been a gift. And at any moment, and I'm a man of faith, if God says, hey, it's time for you to go, guess what? I'd be more than happy to go, because I wasn't supposed to be alive that night. They revived me twice, trying to get me to go to, I was going in and out. I wasn't meant to be. I mean, people with my injuries, most of the time the survival rate is not high, and to still be
Yeah.
alive, to breathe, and to be on even on this podcast is a blessing, and to kind of give on that message is that we all go through our tough times. The cost of war might not be sometimes in that particular moment. It might cost you a lifetime with certain things that you have to deal with, but don't quit, because we're alive. We came back from what I consider hell and back.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Everything is a blessing at this point. And, you know, and if you don't mind, I'd like to touch on the mental health part about it. Is that
Yeah.
because, when I lost Sarton DeCiccio,
Please.
you think, like, hey, everyone came home physically good, but inside, man, there's another war going on. And we as combat soldiers aren't trained to take the words, the stuff that's going on in the heart and the mind, to come out to the mouth and then put it out in the world. It's
Right.
a hard thing to do. It's the hardest thing. It's the hardest thing for a man to do. You know what I'm saying? It's almost kind of like that's the way we're built. Like, we need to hold everything on the inside, and we need to take care of everybody else.
Well, and
And
after being in the military, especially as a combat soldier, that's even more ingrained, right?
100%.
I mean, that's like you don't have the mental space for that because you're training and you're getting ready
Right.
for the mission, or
And
you're
you think
you're
about
in
the
the mission.
stigma too. The
Yeah.
stigma behind it is that if you bring up your emotions and your feelings, the stigma is that you're weak.
Right.
But you're not weak, man. You know what I'm saying? You've done so much more. You've done all those things in your life. Definition weak should not be a part of that definition. You know what I'm saying? It should be empowering to get it out, because I mean, you don't know. It's almost like sometimes we're viewing our feelings as landmines, but sometimes you have to let those landmines go off so that you can walk to the next part of the path,
Yeah.
right? I mean, you know, that's a tough one. It is a tough one. And I don't know if there's a cure for that. The only cure for that is for you to have that honest conversation with yourself, to kind of to be like, I need help, and trust me, through my 15 months at the hospital and through my time of being medically retired till now, there's been plenty of times where I kind of had to push my ego aside and be like, hey, I need to go do this. I need help. Someone help me, please. I have all these blessings I have. I don't want to lose it at any given moment. And, you know, and it takes a while to get to that point. And you know what I'm saying, Jason? And,
Yeah.
Podcasts like these, or interaction with other veterans, we should encourage that. I mean, we're all getting older now. You think about, I'm like 10 years away from that war. We still have problems that we're going to be carrying for the rest of our lives. Even if you didn't go to war or get deployed, there are certain things that happen along the journey of your service, that is way beyond your limits or your capacity. Sometimes you just need to talk about it. Sometimes it doesn't just concern war; it concerns about the journey you got there. Sometimes you're so confused about who you are, who you need to be, that you hide those feelings, you tuck it in for the world, but the world needs you to be who you are. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. I know I mean, all that's so positive. And I think, one of the things you touched on was having that gratitude, right? And that gratitude for, what is available to you now, kind of like your second chance, right?
Right.
And, for all those dealing with, the mental health challenges after war or serious injury or something like that, I think the ability to visualize those things that you're grateful for is a strong, magnetic north to keep you headed in the right direction. And it
Yes.
may not be the solution, but man, I think it's something you got to keep your eye on, because there is a lot to be grateful for, even though
100%.
there's
One of the tools that I used for that transition when I first came home was having a notebook with me. Like if I couldn't tell someone or help explain my emotions, you know what I'm saying? I would write it in my notebook. Like I would just write. You know what I'm saying? Like
yeah,
even if whether it's like one paragraph or one sentence, I felt like sometimes as I wrote it out, it almost like sometimes a light bulb went off. Like, oh, maybe my perspective on this was wrong, or maybe my perspective on this needs something. You know what I'm saying? Then it made it a little bit easier to be like, hey, since I couldn't express it to you vocally, do you mind reading this? You know what I'm saying? Do you mind taking a look at this? Can you help me? Can I get your perspective on it? And I think one of the things I think the military is really good about, and is perspective, right? I mean, you have a perspective in your training, and then when you're ready to go, they send you off, right? But then even during these meetings, they always give you like, hey, here's our plan A, but if plan A doesn't work, here's plan B. If plan B doesn't work, it's plan C. You already know what Delta is going to be, because if you make it to Delta, hey, you know what? But all these plan A, B, C, and D are all different perspective how to look at a situation, right? If you can apply that to your life the same way, and I think where I think in our veteran community, where a majority of us, and including myself, because I still have these moments, something happens and you're like, oh shoot, my plan A just blew up. What do I do?
yeah,
Right? And you think there's no plan B, there's no plan C, plan D, but there is. You're not allowing yourself to see plan B, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta. You know what I'm saying?
right.
If you have Bravo, Charlie, and Delta written somewhere, or you tell someone about what Bravo, Charlie, and Delta is, when A goes wrong, hopefully Bravo, Charlie, and Delta can help bring that anxiety, bring those thoughts down where you can move forward, right? And I think the moving forward is probably the hardest part when you get stuck in one of those moments.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hear so many cliches and so much testament to this, like in the Bible and stuff. But it's, sometimes you have to go through those valleys to get to the next peak, right?
100.
And it's hard to see that when you're in it, right?
Right.
And I think back to like, just training in the military, right? Just going through some of the physical stuff. You're like, I'm not gonna make it through this. I'm just not gonna make it. And then when you get done on the other side and you have a chance to reflect, you're like, actually, it wasn't as hard as I thought it was at the time. But while I was in it, man, that was difficult. And there's a lot to be said for, allowing yourself to be okay with those valleys,
Yes.
and to regroup and move on to plan Bravo or Charlie or whatever it is, or develop that plan in the midst of that struggle. And you hear it from all sorts of like entrepreneurial books, or Michael Jordan, these famous people, of how many times they failed, but yet they reached such heights of greatness, right?
Right.
But it was through those trials and those tribulations and those valleys that they went through that shaped them to be who we all recognize, or who their peers recognize them to be, right? And
100%.
and a lot of those struggles, especially in the veteran community, for veterans who are maybe now successful in their careers on the civilian side and stuff like that, the transparency isn't available to see the struggles and stuff that they may have gone through, right? With
Right.
mental health and all that sort of stuff. But that's really a big piece of what shaped them to be where they are today.
Yeah.
So tell us, what are you doing now as a civilian? What do you got your heart set on, and what are you working towards?
You know, after my medical retirement, I went to go work for a big defense corporation. Learned that I didn't like sitting behind a cubicle. Great opportunity, nothing, and I really appreciate the great of that opportunity. But I realized that, you know what, I didn't like sitting behind a cubicle and doing like the same routine work again. Um, and so what I did was I had a mentor that when I was while I was at Walter Reed, we talked about like different opportunities. And so one day, working for the defense contractor, I noticed an opportunity in contracting, especially with construction and stuff like that. So I ended up from 2010 to 2008, I was a CEO of a company called Animal Builders out in San Francisco. We were a civil engineering company that took me on another journey. And those journeys I recognized. I almost felt like it was just a very long like boot camp for learning how to be a businessman. Transitioning. The most important thing was probably communication and mentality. Because in the Army, we're so direct about what we want and how we want to do it, and we just say it, and then we're like, let's make it happen. In the
Right.
civilian world, it's not that same way, right? You can't just go, you have to, there has to be a little bit longer dialogue, right? You have to, you know, be sensitive to other people's thoughts and feelings, right? It's not like you're not giving out orders anymore, right?
Yeah.
And it was a good learning process. And not only that, but I felt like my leadership skills also was building that foundation, right? And I had to change my leadership roles, change the perspective of myself as a little bit as well too, to grow. Had a great journey there. Sold my shares of the company in 2018, and then moved to Texas, uh, away from California. So now I'm here in Texas, and I have a second venture. It's called DNW Ventures, and it's named after my company motto in the Army, deeds not words. And so what I'm doing
I
here
love
now
that.
is I'm an area developer uh, for a concept, for a franchising concept to help build out third stores here in San Antonio and Austin. But that's just the first part of my venture. What I really like to do, and prior to us being on this podcast, sharing with you, I like to eventually buy some land, buy some building, grow that out. Um, Part of that at some point, I like to get back to my mission of if help supporting the veteran community. I'm doing that now on a one-to-one basis, but I like kind of do like a bigger outreach. I sit on two boards, veteran boards. One organization is called the Sentinel of Freedom. The other one is 100 Entrepreneurs, and it's veteran owned, like veteran established nonprofit organizations. Um, and so part of the entrepreneurial thing is that always I'm not chasing the money. I think I learned that on the night that I got blown up in 2008. That at that night when I was losing blood, losing all this stuff, you can take back is memories, right? I
Right.
couldn't take a cent. I couldn't take any of the money in my bank account. Didn't know if I was going to make it or not. And so as an entrepreneur, my goal is not to chase the money, but to build impact, whether that's impact in an individual, impact on a community. But I want to change people's lives, right? I want to give people that second chance that they're looking for, or a chance in general to kind of get to the next level where they want to go. So I've been doing that with the veteran community whenever I can, as in mentorship with entrepreneurship. I do some speaking engagements for the VA on just basically what we're talking about here: transition, recovery, mental health. And I'm starting to write a book soon on that transition, on my journey, on resilience and transitioning. I think things like that, is helpful to our community, And I'd like to give you a special shout out too, Jason. Podcasts like these are very, very important. And I think it's such a great motivation and inspiration to our community. So I want to thank you for doing something like this because,
Oh, thanks.
sometimes, a lot of us, especially veterans, are like, oh, this would be cool to do it. But, they don't know how to do it. But, especially when you have a veteran and an entrepreneur, I think that's a very dangerous weapon.
Yeah.
It's a special skill. You got that mentality. And I think podcasts like this is just the spread of love and inspiration to our other veterans that are either retired already or looking to get out and moving on to the next part of their life. Because The transition part is the hugest is the biggest part in whether and how, and it's how you transition is how what makes you successful, right?
100%.
And I don't think using just military tools as in the TAP program or stuff like that, you really want to do, and here's just my bit of advice to our veteran community that's listening to this, is that if you know you're going to exit before, like in maybe a year or two, and you're not going to re-up, or you know you're getting ready to retire, you got to start building these networks now, start making your connections,
Yeah.
and then start picking people and their brains on what is it they're doing, and then figuring out what you want to do. Because sometimes after like your service, I think a lot of veterans will agree with me, money doesn't really do it, because we didn't do it for the money to start off with. You're
Right.
not going to get rich by being a serviceman or woman, right? And I think having that purpose and that mission again, you can build that purpose. You can understand what your mission is after this next part of the transition. I feel like your transition is a lot smoother, right? Along with everything else. And the most important part, and is spending time with your family. I think when you're in the service, you lose a lot of that time. And I think for a lot of veterans who feel like they're transitioning and they're going to be by themselves, you're not by yourself. You have a family that's ready to welcome you home or be there for you. And, you define your family however that is. For some of us, it's our old military buddies, right?
Right.
For some of us is our actual family. Some of us is the friends that we grew up are waiting to open arms, and use that as a support group. We all need support group. You can be the toughest SOB in the military. When you get out, the last feeling you want to feel is that you're by yourself.
Totally. Yeah, and that happens so much, in the military. You're part of something. There's people
Yes.
there to support you. You transition from one base to the next. There's like this sense of security, a home, right? You go through those gates in the morning and you're like, I'm safe, right? Like but when you're in the civilian world, you're not going through the base gates anymore.
No.
There's not a couple thousand people there all wearing the same clothes as you going for the same mission, the same purpose, right? So, I think that's really sage advice. And tapping into.
You said it so finessely well. I mean, that's the essence of all I was trying to say. I mean, you said it beautifully too.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I mean that, and there's that cliche, like your network is your net worth. So to your point, about preparing, if you're not going to re-up or you're going to retire, social media is a double-edged sword, but it's, helped us with this a little bit, is, re-engage with those contacts and those relationships. It might have been from a buddy you made friends with in basic training, or at your MOS school, or maybe a different unit, or buddies from high school, or whatever, right? But it's reestablishing those connections before you're out, so you do have that network, right? You do have that safety net that we're so used to feeling in the military, but now you've got that safety network in the civilian world, even though you might not be sitting in the same desk next to them, or marching down the street with them. They're there. And it sure does prevent a lot of that isolationist feeling, which then is a downward spiral, right? And then you add the mental health components to all that stuff, and it can really, really put you in a bad spot. So, being able to maintain and regrow those relationships. And as you were saying,
do you mind if I just spend like about 30 seconds explaining that also too, is that
yeah,
the reason why I said that too is that sometimes we're so caught up on like, getting everything done, making sure all the task list to exit, out of the service, and we wait till that last minute. When you wait till that last minute and you get out and you're not prepared, just imagine the amount of pressure. Hey, I gotta go find a job. Oh crap. Easier said than done, right? Number two is that pressure leads on to other things. You got to remember, we're not just changing careers, we're changing lifestyles. If you look at it from the military perspective, when you were in the military, food, housing, allowance, utilities, they were all taken care of for you. You just had to show up to duty. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, you just did the bare minimum personally for yourself when you're in the military. Now, when you're exiting and you don't have a plan, you're not prepared, And all of a sudden, you gotta go look for a job, you gotta look for housing, you gotta look for all this stuff. Now you gotta start paying the bills. I mean, just paying the bills itself on a monthly basis. When you used to have someone to do it for you, and now you have to do it yourself. And now you're looking at these numbers, and you're like, oh crap! Like that messes with your mental health and your mind so much that that'll affect how the way you view, right? And now instead of putting yourself out there like a year or two ahead of time, even if let's talk about not having a network. Let's say you don't have a network, right?
Right.
Put yourself out there, and people are going to be like, well, that's easier said than done. But think about it. When you joined the service, you had no military connections at all. Some of you might, I would say about 5% might, other 95% didn't. And then you threw yourself out into the open to boot camp, right? That's your first set of like your military experience. And then you start building relationships. But that was built over time. That wasn't built instantly. And then people forget that though, right? And they're like, oh, I don't know how to put myself out there. Well, how did you do it? You built yourself in the military by throwing yourself into boot camp, which is like, no one's going to strip you of your name, your name tags, your boots. You're not going to have to earn everything back. But all we're asking is that you change your mindset and be like, I'm going to throw myself out there to start building these relationships. Those relationships are very helpful in the long run of things. You did it once already. You just got to remind yourself. I always like to mirror my military experience, and then as I was transitioning, that's what I used to adapt to my civilian side, right? I mean, you asked me that question. So what I did was, a lot of the times I used my infantry training and leadership skills, and then said, how could I translate that to the corporate or civilian side of things? And once you start looking like, hey, adapt and overcome, you can do that all day in the civilian world because you already know how to do that. You just got to translate how you're going to adapt and overcome on that sense of thing, right? You're training to survive. It's the same, you learn how to survive in the military. And when you come back out here, you're going to use some of those skills to survive, adapt, and survive, in the civilian sector, right? And you're using bits and pieces of what you learn and then translating in a different manner. And I think, once again, transition and translating your skills is the crucial part to your success. But you have to take the time. The key word here is time. You got to really work on that for yourself. Not for anybody else, but for yourself. And building that network is definitely a part of that. It makes the transition a little bit easier.
Yeah. Yeah, you're totally right. And I think as you were kind of talking about before and in being an entrepreneur, even just hitting that civilian job. And one thing that I think about a lot is, when you're hitting those tough times, whether it might be you just got out or you've been out for a while and your venture's struggling or whatever it is, right? Or you're applying for that military job or that civilian job and you're in the interview phase or whatever. One thing that I always hearken back to, which you alluded to in your story, right? On your hike, right? When the sergeant told you don't quit. There's like that switch that goes off, and especially in the combat zone, but there's that switch that goes off that is kind of like that warrior mentality. Like you are going to conquer, right? Because you're trained to do that. You're going to conquer that hill. You're going to conquer that hike. You're going to conquer that challenge, right? Right. Even though we have those moments, because we're all human, that we want to quit. But we don't, right? And we persevere through whatever the challenge is. And I think that is an important sense to be able to re-tap into as you go through this transition and beyond, is because you're going to hit it more often than you probably wish.
Right.
And you got to be able to dip back into that mentality, that kind of fight or flight mentality. And you got to flip that switch and you got to be able to persevere and make it through it. And it might be something as simple as reaching out to old friends or whatever, right? Or tapping into that network of people that you serve with in the military. A lot of them, as you said, veterans and entrepreneurs, man, that's a heck of a weapon, a veteran who's an entrepreneur. And so many of them are out there that you probably served with, right? And while it might not be for a job, it might just be for, that's a good person to know. One day that connection may help me.
Going back to that word quit too, let me tell you something. After being yelled like that, I told myself, you know what? I will never let anyone call me a quitter again. There would be no way in hell I'm going to have to die. Even when I got injured that night, you know, as exhausted, as hurt and in pain I was, I'm like, if it's not God's will, guess what? I ain't quitting. I'm gonna keep going. You know, I gotta do what I gotta do. Even when they told me I couldn't walk, I was like, ah, you know, I initially thought you're like, oh damn. But then I was like, you know what? Not gonna let anyone call me a quitter. Not again. No, not ever again. Even during my business time, there's many moments where I'm like, why am I doing this? I mean, I think every entrepreneur, if you haven't asked yourself the question, why am I doing this? Why am I here? Like, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. And then you're not really truly an entrepreneur unless you go through that cycle, right? Because then
Yeah.
all of a sudden, that moment, the moment it leaves your mouth, like, why am I doing this? I'm done. And then you think to yourself, no, I'm not. Especially as a veteran too, you're like, no, I'm not. Back to the drawing board. There's got to be another way, and there's always another way. That's the crazy part about it. Then I've said this a million times. You think you're at a dead end, and all of a sudden, you go back to your, like you said, the warrior spirit, and you're like, yeah, there's a wall here. Am I going to climb over this wall? Am I going to kick this wall down? Am I going to blow up this wall? You know, or am I going to ram this wall down? Whatever I need to do to get on the other side, I'm going to go do it. And there always is that option. You know, the only time you really truly reach that dead end as a veteran and as an entrepreneur is when you tell yourself, I'm done. Right. And if you
Right.
still got any drop of fight in you, you'll never come to that point, you know. And I know I'm saying that, you know, it's a lot easier, you know, some veterans going to hear this million. It's a lot easier said than done. But I will promise you this: when the life is being sucked out of you, that is your last moment of quitting. You know what I'm saying? And if you've experienced that, quitting is just going to be another thought. It won't be an action for you because you know what, you know, life has been taken out of you already once. And if you've been on that front line, think about those times where you just remember, like, oh shit, if I can just get out of here tonight, just let me make it to the next day, Lord. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm gonna do better. And you know, and as veterans, we've been through those moments. I mean, it doesn't even have to be war. You can be in garrison training, and, you know, and you've experienced something for the first time. And you're like, oh shoot, just let me get through the night. Let me get through this night training. This, you know, in this night FTX. Just let me get through it. I'm going to be a better person after this. I already know what I need to do. I'll conquer this next time. Let me get through this. You know, and it's the same thing. And I think for our veteran community, when it comes to that support, you get to that point mentally inside your head, you're telling yourself you're done. Get those words out so that you can hear yourself say it. Sometimes if you hear yourself saying it, you're going to stop yourself, and then you're going to go look for that help to get you through that, to go get you through that wall again, you know. And as an entrepreneur, when you get to that point, if you pick up the phone and you reach out to your colleagues and you talk it out, I promise you by the end of that conversation, there will be some sort of avenue of approach that you'll have. You're gonna be like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna try this out, you know, before I call it. And I almost guarantee you a solution will be there waiting for you, right?
Yeah.
So many trials and errors.
100%, man. Yeah, you can't, you gotta be doing it. You gotta know your purpose, why you're doing it. Right.
Yeah.
And one of the most valuable things I've learned in the civilian world as an entrepreneur is it's really smart to ask for help. People inherently want to help. And I think a lot of military folks, the pride and the ego, not wanting to be weak, all those things, right, combined, makes us go to a place of, I can do it on my own. I don't need to ask for help. I got this. I'll figure it out. But
Right.
you know what? That network that we're talking about, all they want to do is help. They just haven't been asked.
Yeah.
And it's worked for me in helping me in my business to just ask people for help more than anything I do.
100%. Just to touch upon that thought perspective as well too, is that, you know, you don't want to ask for help. You can't. You think you can do it all by yourself, but you didn't fight a war all by yourself.
Right.
And we forget that though. But we forget that though.
Yeah.
You know?
The military doesn't train just one soldier all by themselves, right?
Nope. At all.
You're with a unit, right? And there's a reason for that.
One unit. Yes.
Yeah. Well, HT, man, this has been awesome. I thank you so much for being on the show with us today and sharing your experience. I think we talked about some incredible things for our veteran community and our active duty military too. And I hope they get a chance to hear this. And I'm grateful that I got to meet you and have this conversation, man. I love it and would love to continue it another time.
Truly an honor today. Thank you so much for having me on today. Just to, speak to another veteran, entrepreneur, podcast, reach out and impact, our community. Honestly, honored to do that. My honor to meet you today as well, too.
Awesome. Well, thanks, brother. Cheers to the next time.
To the next time. I'll talk to you later.
See ya.
Bye.
Thanks so much for checking out this week's episode. Please subscribe, click the link below, share with your friends. And hey, if you know a military person or a veteran with a great story to share, we would love to highlight them on the podcast and get their story out to everybody. Thanks so much.